What if I told you there was a man who walked the earth, so powerful, so hypnotic, so impossibly resilient, that when his enemies finally cornered him, they became convinced he wasn't a man at all? A man they had to kill not once, not twice, but over and over again on a single blood-soaked night, a night that would etch itself into history as a testament to the terrifying durability of one human being. This is the story of Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk, and his final, unbelievable hours. This isn't just an assassination, it's a descent into a nightmare, where the line between man and monster blurred until it vanished completely. It's the story of how a group of noble assassins, armed with poison, bullets and steel, set out to kill a peasant and ended up doing battle with a demon. By the winter of 1916, Russia was on its knees. The First World War was draining the lifeblood of the nation, and at the heart of the empire, the Romanov dynasty was paralyzed. The source of this paralysis, many believed, was one man, a Siberian mystic with piercing, almost supernatural eyes named Grigori Rasputin. He had gained an unshakable hold over Tsarina Alexandra, the Empress of Russia, by seemingly healing her hemophiliac son, Alexei. To the Tsarina, he was a holy man, a saint sent by God. To the Russian nobility, he was a cancerous tumor, a debauched charlatan whose influence was driving their sacred empire into the abyss. And so, a conspiracy was born, led by one of the wealthiest men in Russia, Prince Felix Yusupov. The plan was as elegant as it was deadly. Yusupov would use his own palace, the magnificent Moika Palace in St. Petersburg, as the stage for Rasputin's final act. He would personally invite the monk to a late-night meeting, luring him with the promise of meeting his beautiful wife, Princess Irina. It was a bait Rasputin, a notorious womanizer, could not resist. The invitation was extended, and the holy devil accepted. The trap was set. On the frozen night of December 29, 1916, the Moika Palace was a picture of silent, aristocratic grandeur. But deep within its bowels, in a small, cozy cellar room, a scene of exquisite horror was being arranged. Prince Yusupov had meticulously prepared this room to be Rasputin's tomb. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the granite walls. A heavy bearskin rug lay on the floor. In the center of the room, on a small table, sat a gramophone, ready to play Yankee Doodle on a loop, a bizarrely cheerful soundtrack for a murder. And on another table, the instruments of death were laid out like a feast. There was a platter of delicate petit fours, chocolate eclairs frosted with pink and white icing. They looked delicious, innocent. But inside, they were packed with enough potassium cyanide to fell a horse. Alongside them stood several bottles of Rasputin's favorite sweet Madeira wine. 3 of these bottles were also heavily dosed with the same crystalline poison. Dr. Stanislaus de Lazavert, one of the conspirators, had ground the cyanide into a fine powder and, with trembling hands, personally seeded the cakes and wine. The dose was astronomical. It was designed not just to kill, but to kill almost instantly, a fact Lazavert, a physician, knew well. Yusupov surveyed the scene. Everything was perfect. He had even set up 2 tables, one poisoned, one clean, so he could pretend to eat and drink alongside his victim. All that was left was for the guest of honor to arrive. As the minutes ticked by, the silence in the cellar became a living, breathing entity, thick with dread and anticipation. Just after midnight, Rasputin arrived. He strode into the palace, a hulking figure in his simple peasant's tunic and heavy boots, his long, greasy hair and tangled beard a stark contrast to the aristocratic splendor around him. His famous eyes, deep-set and luminous, scanned everything. Yusupov led him down to the prepared cellar, explaining that his wife was entertaining guests upstairs and would be down shortly. Rasputin seemed calm, almost serene, as he settled into a chair. For a time, they simply talked. Yusupov, his nerves stretched to the breaking point, watched as Rasputin initially refused the offered treats. The monk claimed he was off sugar and sweets. Yusupov's heart sank. Had the entire plan failed before it even began? Then, after what felt like an eternity, Rasputin changed his mind. He reached out a hand and took one of the pink frosted cakes. He popped it into his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Then he took another. And then another. Yusupov watched, frozen, expecting the man to clutch his throat, to gasp, to convulse and fall to the floor. Nothing happened. Rasputin then pointed to the wine. "Give me some of this sweet wine," he said. Yusupov, his hands shaking so violently he could barely pour, filled a glass from a poisoned bottle and handed it to him. Rasputin drank it down. His face didn't change. He simply wiped his beard and asked for another glass. He drank that one, too. The room was silent save for the crackling fire and the tinny, insane music from the gramophone. Rasputin, having consumed enough poison to kill a half-dozen men, simply sat there, his hypnotic eyes fixed on his host, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. An hour passed. It was an hour of pure, psychological torture for Prince Yusupov. He sat across from a man who should have been a contorted, lifeless corpse. Instead, Rasputin was very much alive. He showed no signs of distress, no hint of the agonizing death that cyanide was supposed to inflict. He complained only of a slight tickle in his throat and a burning sensation in his stomach, which he dismissed as indigestion. He seemed to grow more animated, more energetic, even suggesting they go visit a local Romani tavern. The poison wasn't just failing to kill him, it seemed to be invigorating him. Yusupov was drenched in a cold sweat. Science had failed. Logic had collapsed. The chilling thought that had been a whisper among the Russian elite now screamed in his mind. This was not a man. This was a being protected by dark, unholy forces. Upstairs, the other conspirators, including the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar, and Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing politician, were growing frantic. They could hear the gramophone, the murmur of voices. Why was it taking so long? Yusupov excused himself and stumbled up the stairs, his face pale as a ghost. "It's not working," he stammered. "The poison has no effect. He's still down there, alive." Panic erupted. Had the doctor lied? Had the cyanide been switched? Dr. Lazevert swore it was pure. The conspirators were faced with a terrifying reality. Their neat, clinical assassination plot had spiraled into a supernatural horror story. The monster in their basement had feasted on their poison and was now asking for a guitar so he could sing. A new plan was needed. A more direct, more brutal plan. The time for subtlety was over. Yusupov, his resolve hardened by terror, was handed a Browning revolver by the Grand Duke Dmitry. "Go down and finish it," he was told. Yusupov descended the stairs one final time, the cold, heavy steel of the gun, a terrifying comfort in his hand. He found Rasputin standing by the table, examining the intricate details of a crystal crucifix. An idea sparked in Yusupov's mind. He approached the monk. "Grigori Yefimovich," he said, his voice a low tremor. "You had better look at the crucifix and say a prayer." Rasputin turned his gaze from the cross to Yusupov. According to Yusupov's own memoirs, a look of strange, gentle submission crossed the monk's face. He turned back to the crucifix. That was the moment. Yusupov raised the revolver, aimed it directly at Rasputin's heart, and fired. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. A terrible, guttural roar ripped from Rasputin's throat as he clawed at his chest. His body convulsed, and he crashed backwards onto the bearskin rug, motionless. A dark stain began to spread across his silk tunic. It was done. Yusupov, his ears ringing, stood over the body, watching for any sign of life. There was none. He nudged the body with his foot. It was limp. He was finally, truly dead. The conspirators rushed down into the cellar, their faces a mixture of relief and morbid curiosity. They crowded around the body, staring at the man who had held their empire hostage. He lay still, his eyes closed, his face serene. The crisis was over. Russia was saved. They began to plan the disposal of the body, their voices loud and giddy with success. Yusupov, however, couldn't shake a deep, primal sense of unease. Something was wrong. He felt a chilling, inexplicable compulsion to check the body one last time, to make absolutely sure. He knelt beside the fallen monk, placing his hand on his chest, feeling for a heartbeat that wasn't there. He leaned in close, staring at Rasputin's face. And then, the single most terrifying moment of his life occurred. The left eye of the corpse snapped open. It was green and viperous, and it stared directly into Yusupov's soul. Before he could scream, the right eye opened, too. A horrifying, inhuman growl rumbled from deep within Rasputin's chest. In one impossible, fluid motion, the man who had been shot through the heart leaped to his feet. Foam flecked his lips, his eyes burned with a diabolical rage, and he roared Yusupov's name. The man wasn't just alive, he was a resurrected demon, fueled by a terrifying, otherworldly fury. The scene descended into pure chaos. Rasputin, the walking corpse, lunged for Yusupov, his fingers clawing like talons. He grabbed the prince by the shoulders, his grip like iron, and began to shake him, screaming his name over and over. Yusupov, paralyzed by sheer terror, felt Rasputin rip one of the golden epaulets from his tunic. The other conspirators were frozen in a state of shock and horror, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. A dead man had returned to life and was now trying to murder his killer. Yusupov finally broke free, scrambling away in a mad panic. Rasputin, ignoring the other men in the room, turned and lurched towards the stairs. He moved with a horrifying, unnatural gait, like a broken puppet animated by a malevolent force. He clawed his way up the narrow stone staircase, still roaring, and burst through the door into the palace's main courtyard. He was escaping. A man who had been poisoned and shot through the chest was now staggering out into the frozen St. Petersburg night, a trail of blood marking his path in the pristine white snow. The assassin's triumphant murder had turned into a desperate hunt for a monster. Vladimir Purishkevich was the first to snap out of the horrified trance. An experienced politician and a man of action, he grabbed his own pistol, a savage, and ran after the escaping mystic. He burst into the courtyard to see Rasputin, a dark, lumbering shape against the snow, shouting defiantly at the palace. "Felix, Felix, I will tell the Tsarina everything." Purishkevich took aim and fired. He missed. He fired again. Missed again. Rasputin, impossibly, kept moving, lurching towards the main gate that led to the street and freedom. Purishkevich, his own heart hammering, steadied his hand for a third shot. He aimed carefully and fired. This time, the bullet struck Rasputin in the shoulder, spinning him around. The monk stumbled but did not fall. He was still on his feet. Purishkevich took a final, desperate aim at the monster's head. He fired a fourth time. The bullet hit its mark. It struck Rasputin in the forehead, just above the right eye. With a final, choked sigh, the indestructible man finally pitched forward and collapsed head first into a snowdrift, his terrifying escape brought to an end. This time, there was no doubt. No one could survive a bullet to the brain. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the ragged, panting breaths of the assassins. They approached the body cautiously, half expecting it to rise again. Rasputin lay still. Blood pooled in the snow beneath his head. But the terror he had inflicted upon them was not so easily extinguished. They were no longer rational men executing a political enemy. They were terrified exorcists trying to banish a demon. They needed to be certain. They needed to obliterate him. What followed was an act of pure, frenzied savagery. Prince Yusupov, grabbing a heavy, rubber-coated steel club he had brought as a contingency, began to beat the body with all his strength. He struck Rasputin's head and body again and again, a storm of frantic, brutal blows meant to smash, to pulverize, to ensure that not a single spark of that unholy life could remain. He struck him with such insane fury that the other conspirators had to physically pull him away, afraid he would beat the body into an unrecognizable pulp. Their fear had curdled into a vicious, primal need for absolute destruction. Now came the final task, disposing of the evidence. They couldn't leave the battered, bullet-riddled body in the courtyard of one of Russia's most famous palaces. They dragged the corpse back inside, wrapped it tightly in a heavy blue curtain, and bound it securely with ropes. They loaded the grotesque bundle into a car and drove through the deserted pre-dawn streets of St. Petersburg towards the outskirts of the city. Their destination was the frozen Malaya Nevka River. Arriving at the Petrovsky Bridge, they hauled their heavy cargo from the car. They found a hole in the thick river ice, a spot where the current was strong. With one final collective effort, they shoved the body of Grigori Rasputin through the hole. It sank instantly, disappearing into the black, frigid water below. As they watched the ripples fade, a profound sense of relief washed over them. They had poisoned him, shot him 4 times, beaten him senseless, and now had committed his body to a grave of ice. They had sent the demon to a watery hell. It was finally, definitively over. 3 days later, the body was discovered. A river policeman spotted a frozen boot sticking out of the ice downstream from the bridge. The authorities were called, and the body of Grigori Rasputin was pulled from its icy tomb. It was taken for an official autopsy, conducted by Professor Dmitry Kosaratov. The entire city, already buzzing with rumors of Rasputin's disappearance, held its breath. The conspirators waited, confident the autopsy would confirm their story: death by gunshot. But Professor Kosaratov's report would deliver one last, horrifying twist, a final posthumous act of defiance from the mad monk that would cement his legend for all time. The report confirmed the horrific beating. It confirmed the close-range gunshot wounds, including the fatal one to the forehead. But when the professor examined Rasputin's lungs, he made a discovery that sent a shockwave of disbelief through the city. They were full of water. The official cause of death was not the poison, not the bullets, not the brutal bludgeoning. The official cause of death was drowning. This meant that after everything, after the cyanide, the bullet to the chest, the bullet to the brain, the savage beating, he had still been alive when they threw him into the river. He had been conscious enough, alive enough, to breathe in the freezing water that finally claimed him. Some reports even sensationally claimed his arms were found frozen above his head, as if, in his last moments, he had been trying to break through the ice. The story of that night exploded across Russia and the world. It was no longer a political assassination. It was a modern-day myth, a Gothic horror story come to life. The men who had set out to demystify Rasputin, to expose him as a mere mortal fraud, had instead achieved the exact opposite. Their desperate, panicked attempts to kill him had made him immortal. They had transformed him from a political problem into a supernatural legend, a man who refused to die, a demon in the flesh. His impossible death became a dark omen for the dynasty he had served. Just a few short months later, the Russian Revolution would erupt, and the Romanov family, who had once relied on Rasputin's holy protection, would meet their own brutal end in a cellar in Ekaterinburg. The assassins had hoped to save the monarchy by killing Rasputin, but they had only succeeded in writing the first chapter of its epitaph. The question that lingers, a ghostly whisper over a century later, is not how Rasputin died, but how he lived through such an ordeal. Was it an incredible, freakish combination of luck and physical resilience? Or, as his killers came to believe in their terror, were they truly trying to kill a man who was protected by forces beyond our comprehension? We may never know. But the legend of his final terrifying night serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the truth of history is far stranger, and far more horrifying, than any fiction.